You're listening to the Mannered Podcast. Welcome to Mannered. Today, it's just me, no guest, no expert, just a topic that's been sitting with me because, well, I'm guilty of it. We're talking about flakiness. And I don't mean the kind where something truly comes up. Life happens. That's human. I mean the kind where you say yes with the best intentions and then later realize you don't actually have the energy. You don't have the margin. You don't have the follow through to show up the way you promised. I've done it more than I'd like to admit, and I'm sure I have a few friends out there shaking their heads and nodding up and down. I've flaked on plans I was excited about. I've canceled things I should have never agreed to in the first place, and I've sent those messages where you try to soften the disappointment with extra words, hoping the apology somehow makes up for the pattern. I've even maybe exaggerated some circumstances to get out of certain things, which I might talk about here in a bit. But this episode isn't about shaming flaky people because most flaky people aren't careless. They're optimistic. They want to be included. They want to please. But good intentions don't always translate into good manners. Today, I want to talk about why flakiness happens, what it quietly communicates, and how we can do better without becoming rigid, boring, or unavailable humans. And yes, I'll share a couple stories where I absolutely dropped the ball. So to get us started, let's talk about the cost of flakiness. Why is this an etiquette topic? And why is this something that I'm talking about today? Well, flakiness ultimately undermines trust more than disagreement. So from an etiquette standpoint, reliability is foundational courtesy. Experts consistently point out that people can forgive awkwardness, people can forgive conflict, but people struggle to forgive unreliability. Flakiness doesn't usually show up as a big moment. There's no argument, there's no confrontation, there's no dramatic ending. It shows up quietly. It looks like someone checking their phone again and again and again. It looks like a table set for two that slowly becomes a table set for one. It looks like a message that says, no worries at all, when there absolutely were worries. Because here's the real cost of flakiness. It's not the canceled plan, it's what happens after. When you flake, you don't just cancel a moment, you introduced uncertainty. And uncertainty makes people adjust. They stop getting excited. They stop rearranging their day. They stop telling themselves, I'll make this work. They don't make a big deal about it. They just lower expectation. That's the cost. People don't usually tell you when flakiness hurts them. They protect themselves instead. They stop inviting. They stop relying. They stop building plans that require your presence. And none of that feels like punishment. It feels like distance. Flakiness teaches people something about your yes. Not because you're careless, not because you don't care, but because consistency is what trust is made of. And every time you cancel late, someone quietly absorbs the inconvenience. They fill the time. They swallow the disappointment. They tell themselves a story that'll make it easier, and the story is rarely flattering. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most flaky people are kind. They're optimistic. They mean it when they say yes. I can speak from experience on this, but etiquette isn't measured by intention. It's measured by impact. And the impact of flakiness is that people learn not to count on you. Not angrily, not loudly, just realistically. That's the cost. And once people stop feeling confident in your word, they stop building anything around it. So this subject hits home in a big way for me. And like I said earlier, I think there's a lot of friends that are probably nodding their head with this. And I think a lot of times it is because I am an optimist. I always want to cram as much as I possibly can into every moment, every calendar. And sometimes there's just not enough time for it. But one thing comes to mind specifically when this subject comes up, and it's something that hangs over my head quite often, and it's regarding one of my favorite people in my lifetime, and that was my mentor and my first general manager, Bob Gorley. He went by BG. He was not only a great mentor and taught me literally the ropes of the business that is now my career to this day, but he became a great friend of mine. And, we went fly fishing together and had dinners together and just really enjoyed my time with him. And after I had left Clear Channel, it was touching base with him every couple of months, every few weeks. And then distance grew and distance grew. And every time we would talk, I would say, "Hey, BG, I can't wait to get together with you soon. I gotta have a barbecue. I gotta have a barbecue. Gotta have a barbecue. Gotta have a barbecue." Every time I talked to him, and a lot of times I had some other friends and coworkers that were with me in this. And finally, one day, I said, "Yeah, BG, I can't wait to have you over for a barbecue here soon." And he said, "Sean, I should live so long." And everyone laughed at the time, me included, and it was kind of that little jab that, I didn't recognize at the time, that I was like, yeah, I think I've been a little flaky on the plans with him. But even after he said that, the barbecue never happened. I never had BG come over to a barbecue, and unfortunately, he passed away. And I wasn't even able to go to his funeral. I had to be back home in Kansas during that time. So it's something that, hangs over my head, that literally to his end of days, I had stood him up on that barbecue. And so it's something I think about, and we still joke about it with my friends and everything, that, it's, "Hey, Sean, you gonna have that barbecue soon?" So, that really came to mind when I was thinking about this subject. And it's something, a lot of times, once again, I'm constantly wanting to bring as much joy as I can to any conversation, any interaction. A lot of times, to me, the joy is planning for the future, and thinking about what's to come and building excitement on things to come. And sometimes I get carried away with that. I build plans that I haven't prepared for. So today I'm going to walk through, a few things that we can do as those kind people, those nice people, or those overly busy people, to not be overly flaky. So, my first piece of etiquette advice and tip number one is treat your yes as a social contract. Now, this is something that I struggle with, and maybe it's because I'm a salesperson and I don't like the word no, but I like to give yeses. I like to tell people, yes, I can do that. Yes, I'll be there. Yes, for sure. Yes, 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 all day long. I'm Mr. Yes Man, telling people I'll be there. And most of the time I am, to be fair. I really make an effort to live up to my yeses, but every now and then it just becomes impossible. So treat your yes as a social contract. Etiquette experts agree a yes is not a casual language, it's a commitment. When you say yes, the other person often restructures their time and they mentally commit. If you say yes, that is a social contract. Imagine it written in stone. And also know that no is an incredibly powerful and acceptable word. We were taught that early on in our primary education courses of dare, just say no. No's okay. No is fine. And I'm a little jealous of those people that can just so directly say no, and it just is so appeasing. People accept it, and it's just like, okay, no, you can't do it. And then I feel like when I say no, I get like these wide eye looks of like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe you just said no." That's what's rolling around in my head. But moving forward, I need to be stronger with no, and I need to treat yes as a social contract. So, a lot of thought leaders out there say leaders don't protect their time by canceling, they protect it by committing carefully. So ask yourself before saying yes, if I say yes, am I willing to be counted on? If not, the polite answer is no. So, my advice for those of you who, like me, struggle with the word no is put it to practice. Just start saying no to simple things. Just tell people, when something's suggested for dinner, no, I think I have a better idea for that. Or just quickly, when someone comes up with a plan, no, I think I'm going to be busy. And the great thing is, you don't even have to have plans. You don't have to know what your plans are. Slowly commit. Slowly commit to that plan. You don't have to say yes right away. Say, you know what? I need to check on some things. I've been really worn out at work lately. Let me get back to you on that. But, going back into this flakiness thing is make sure you get back to them, because if you don't, then you're just also a flake again. Replace those fast yeses with thoughtful pauses. Behavioral psychologists point out that flakiness often begins with impulse optimism. We say yes because it feels good in the moment. It releases those endorphins in our brain and it loves it and it feels great. We want to be liked. We imagine a future version of ourselves with more energy. That I'm so guilty of that. I'm always completely energized 3 days from now. So, but then when the moment comes, it's always like, oh gosh, why did I say yes to that? So be slower with those yeses. And, the expert advice is build in a pause. Phrases that reduce flakiness are, let me check my week and get back to you. Can I confirm tomorrow? A delayed yes is respectful. A rushed yes that becomes a cancellation is not. So, coming in at tip number 3, I have check energy, not intention. Productivity and wellness experts consistently highlight this trap. We commit based on who we want to be, not who we will be that day. And I'm super guilty of this is I want to be the Energizer Bunny. I want to be out skiing this weekend. I want to be pheasant hunting after that. I want to be at the concert. I want to be at the dinner with friends and the birthday parties and so on and so on and so on. But I need to take a hard look at my schedule and, really see myself in that moment when that plan arises. So, knowing the fact that I have a daughter that I'm going to be taking to volleyball practice multiple times a week, and my other daughter to tutor and to her sporting events and her schooling events. And then, after long, hard days at work, I got to put myself in that situation to know consistently how I felt after weeks like that and plan accordingly. And here are some potentially helpful questions you can ask yourself. Before agreeing, ask, what will my energy realistically be like then? Really like envision your plan and what you'll be doing and ask yourself that question. Ask yourself, what will I already have given that day? Once again, take yourself into the moment. And then, am I borrowing energy I don't have yet? Sustainable reliability requires honest self assessment, not optimism. And don't get me wrong, optimism is a great quality to have. And I'm very proud of the optimism that I have, constantly. But when it comes to making plans and saying yes or saying no or whatever it is, dial the optimism back a little bit. And so I actually have a pretty funny story for this one. So, and if my friend is listening to this, please forgive me. Well, so it was a couple of months ago. Once again, I love to go to the concerts. I love to be a part of the action and all that sort of thing. And I have a friend that goes out to this concert at this venue out here, every Sunday night, which is just a brutal night for me. I mean, it's, on top of all of the family stuff, it's preparing for the next day of work, usually lined up with sales meetings and all kinds of stuff. But at the time, I had so much, energy and I was like, yeah, we got to do this. Yeah, I'll be there. Yes, that sounds like a blast. What time should we meet? And all this sort of thing. And so, the whole week goes by. It's Saturday, and already I'm feeling Sunday coming up, and I felt the energy depleted from me. And, but in my mind, I was still going. I told my wife I'm going, and everything was gonna happen. I was gonna go to the concert, even though I was gonna be super tired and that sort of thing. Well, Saturday night, my wife and I are going to bed. And as I'm laying down in bed, we hear this blood curdling scream outside of our house. And, both of us like shut up out of bed, look out the windows, and there's this huddle of people across the street. And, I throw well, I didn't throw my shoes on. I threw, what clothes I had on. My wife and I get out the front door and I just book it to this huddle of people thinking that there's, somebody's getting beat up or something like that. And so I run over there and to my surprise, there's people on the ground wrestling like vicious dogs. And this dog is just ripping this other dog apart and it was horrible. And I'm trying to do everything I can to get this dog off and I'm just like, trying to pull it away and all this sort of stuff. And I ended up looking down and I have like blood all over my hand. I'm like, what in the world happened? Did the dog bite me? Well, I get back, I wash it off, and it was like a piece of my skin had like been peeled off of my finger, I think, just from the overall scuffle of the whole thing, and put a bandage on it, and it hurt a bit, but it wasn't really that bad. It was ultimately repaired with, I think, an over large Band-Aid. But I call my friend Chris the next day and I'm like, "Hey man, I don't think I'm gonna make that concert. It was a late night last night and I was involved in this dog attack." And he's like, "Oh my gosh, a dog attack?" And I was like, "Yeah, I kind of hurt my hand." And to be fair, I did hurt my ankle when I was running barefoot across the street. I think I stepped on something, and I was in a little bit of pain. But anywho, I canceled with him, and like I said earlier in this, it was subtle, it was quiet, it was like, okay, yeah, no worries. Well, it wasn't until like a couple weeks later I met up with this friend that I was supposed to go with, and he looks down at my hand and he was like, "Where's your dog attack thing that you were involved in?" And I was like, "Oh," and I held out my hand. There's like barely like a visible mark. It was like pretty much totally healed by then. And he was like, "This is this vicious dog attack that you were in." And I'm embarrassed. I'm like, "Yeah, yeah. I mean, to be fair, my foot did hurt." And he was like, "Psst, I knew it. I told my girlfriend that you were gonna flake out on us anyways." And so, which honestly was like one of the reasons I decided to do this topic today. And Chris, if you're listening, forgive me, and hopefully I can be less flaky. But sometimes we look for excuses because we made plans that were already a struggle in the first place. So, going back to what we're talking about is just, know what to expect. Imagine yourself on that day and how you are normally on that day, and put yourself there. Don't use the energy that you have today to make those plans. All right, and moving on. So, at tip number 4, I have clarity is kinder than enthusiasm. Say no earlier instead of canceling later. Etiquette authorities emphasize this principle. An early no saves planning energy, it preserves trust, and it keeps future invitations alive. A late cancellation forces someone else to absorb the inconvenience. So, people trust those who are clear, not those who are endlessly agreeable. I mean, put this one into perspective is, which would upset you more if someone told you no, but called you last minute and said, "Hey, surprise, I can actually make it." Or in your head, you're planning on someone to be there, you're planning on doing something with someone, and they call last minute and cancel with you. Just put yourself kind of in their shoes and think of it from that standpoint is, you're way better off just to really like set no is your knee jerk reaction, and then change plans later. You might miss out. Part of the big reason for all of this is most of us struggle with FOMO, and that fear of missing out element, where we feel like if we say no, we're gonna miss out. We're not gonna be in the photo album, and all of that sort of thing. But you're really better off just to be, once again, slow with that yes, and cautious with that yes, and really practice using the word no, or let me check, and the things that we suggested earlier. So, at number 5, I have, if you must cancel, take ownership cleanly. Communication experts agree that over explaining weakens credibility. The best practice is state the cancellation clearly, take responsibility, and avoid excuse stacking. Once again, a lot of times we feel really bad about canceling, so we try and stack on every single thing that led up to the cancellation. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. Just, take ownership of it, state the cancellation clearly, take the responsibility, and avoid stacking up those excuses. So, as an example, just, I need to cancel tonight. I should have paced my week better. I'm sorry. Just leave it there. Ownership restores trust faster than the reasons. So, in my research of this subject, my next tip, I really like this one, and I like the advice that I found for this because I think this is going to be really helpful for me. Is, watch patterns, not just feelings. Social researchers note that patterns define reputation, not isolated events. So, really analyze. You can look back on the things that you flake out on most, and analyze those things and ask, what do I cancel most often? Is it evenings? Is it group plans? Is it weekend commitments? Is it family events? Is take a look at those things and then, stop agreeing to those things you routinely cancel, or find different ways to do those things so you can say yes to those. But, apologies don't rebuild trust, adjusted behavior does. So, those are some quick tips that you can use to really help you, is just, analyze the patterns in your own life. We can all look back and see things that we just regularly don't enjoy to do. I mean, my wife and I all the time when we'll have something coming up, we're like, "Oh gosh, why did we say yes to that?" And it's a pattern where every single time, but I will say there are a lot of times where we just sack up and we do it and then we love whatever it was. So there is that as well. A really valuable life lesson that I was taught is build yourself margin. Margin is not laziness, it's strategy. Allow time in your schedule for you to apply strategy to it. If we're all overpacking our lives from start to finish, there's just no time to implement any kind of strategy, redirect, or anything like that. So build some margin, and build some room for last minute exits or emotional fatigue, or your own flaky behavior. Build buffer time so you don't have to cancel what you've already promised. So, margin is manners. And here's a big one, is stop using let's unless you mean it. And once again, for those of us, and I'm raising my hand right now, those of us optimists out there, let's is almost in everything I say. It's once again, it's because that excitement is, I do envision this future with all my friends and family and everybody doing all the things we want to do all the time, but we really just cannot do that. So I need to watch using the let's word. Communication experts frequently call out vague enthusiasm as a social trap. So let's get together sometime creates false expectations, ghost commitments, and quiet disappointments. So whether it's, let's get together sometime, or let's do this next weekend, or let's plan this, vacation together, whatever it is try to watch the let's language out there. Some better options are suggest a real date, pick a date right then and there. That way you actually have, something that you can have a tangible, reference as to when you're going to do this. And that's really where plans develop from there. Teach yourself to express warmth without expressing commitment. Clarity is respectful language. So I think one of the most famous examples of flakiness that I can think of, and it really wasn't that long ago, it was actually quite recent. It was the Fire Festival. And some of you may have seen the documentary or you read about it in the news. I think most people living on Earth have heard about the Fire Festival. It's literally become a verb now. But I think it's a great example of flakiness for the fact that, the founder of the Fire Festival, Billy McFarland, shot out on social and proclaimed how amazing this event was going to be, that it was going to, people would be flown in private jets to the Bahamas, and these crystal clear waters would be, you know lined with luxurious villa tents and amazing food and drink and huge artists and acts, and the promises just went on and on and on and on. And then, when it came time for people to show up to this event, there were no private jets. They got there, it was emergency tents instead of these nice villas. It was the famous, cheese sandwich inside of a foam container was this luxurious food that was promised. And there were no musical acts, and, people were just let down. Talk about over promising and way under delivering. And, this kind of goes beyond any, subtle flakiness and things that we struggle with on a minor level. But, it really, in a grand application, it's kind of the same thing. It's, who knows what this guy's intentions were, but the impact was real. People were let down, and he completely flaked out on a lot of people and their money, and he became the focus of legal issues and documentaries and on and on and on. So ultimately the lesson here is just everything that we've talked about, it's a lot about just setting expectations early on and not letting people down on promises you make. Yes is a contract. When you tell someone yes, treat it as a social contract. So I think if there's one big takeaway from today, it's that, just make sure to be slow on the yes and go on the no when you don't know. So those are just a few tips for, trying to avoid being flakiness. And it's the etiquette topic of the day. Hopefully we can get started early in the new year here and have a whole year of non-flakiness. And as we're wrapping up, I would like to just give a shout out to the friends and family that I, in my own life, have been flaky with. And so, and once again, doing this show, you're probably thinking that I'm just one gigantic flaky. I hope I'm not really that bad, but there are definitely some clear cut times in my life where things have not worked out as I planned in my head at the time. So that concludes the Mannered podcast. Thank you so much for joining me, and I really appreciate all of you that are listening. It's been really fun to have a bunch of you reaching out. And as I've told a few people, is just because I'm doing this podcast, I am not an expert on etiquette by any means. I'm actually traveling this journey of self-help myself to walk myself through awkward moments that I've had in my own life and use principles that I find along the way and share them with you all. So hopefully you find some value in these things. And if you ever have a subject or anything like that, please reach out to me on my Facebook page. It's the Manner Podcast. And I would love to see your messages and see what you have ideas on. And I'd love to have you as my guest. So please reach out. And in the meantime, just remember, mind your manners.
Thanks for listening to the Mannered Podcast.